Have you ever sat across from a man the whole town worships and realized that none of it was real? Not the diploma, not the degree, not even his name. My name is Reed Castañeda. I'm an electrician in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and 2 years ago I found a dead teenager's journal hidden in a crawlspace. 43 pages about one man, the town's golden child for 11 years. The boy who wrote it was found at the bottom of Briggs Ravine 6 weeks later, ruled accidental. His name was Colt Avery, 17 years old, and the man he'd been investigating stood at Colt's funeral, shaking hands. If you want to hear how a town lost a kid and chose silence, hit subscribe and hit the bell. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's here. Let me take you back to September of 2022. That's when I got the call about the house on Downing Lane. Tahlequah is a small city, but it feels like a small town. Cherokee Nation capital, deep roots, families that go back 5, 6 generations. The kind of place where somebody's great-great-uncle built the bridge you cross every morning, and nobody lets you forget it. I'd been doing electrical work in the area since I was 24. Crawl spaces, attics, panel upgrades, new construction. You work in people's houses long enough, you know the town better than most. You see how people actually live. I was single, rented a place on Choctaw Street, kept to myself mostly. Had a dog named Biscuit who went everywhere with me in the truck. On weekends, I fished the Illinois River if the weather was right. That was my whole life. Colt Avery. I didn't know him well. I knew his family. His dad worked at the tribal hospital. His older sister Margot ran the front desk at the vet clinic on Muskogee Avenue. Colt was a junior at Tahlequah High, played baseball, had this thing where he'd wave at every truck that passed him on the road. Just this big, stupid wave, arm all the way up. People talked about it at his funeral. How you'd see him walking home from practice, arm going up, grinning. He fell off Briggs Ravine on August 12, 2022. That's what the report said. A Saturday night. Hikers found him Sunday morning at the base of a 40-foot drop. He had head trauma, a broken left arm, scrapes on his palms consistent with a fall. The Cherokee County Sheriff's Office investigated for 9 days. They talked to his friends. They checked his phone. They concluded he'd gone out there alone, probably at dusk, lost his footing near the edge. Nobody questioned it. Not publicly. Not at first. I didn't either. The house on Downing Lane was a full rewire. Built in 1974, hadn't been touched since. The new owner, a woman who'd moved from Tulsa, wanted everything up to code before she moved in. I started October 3rd. Estimated 3 weeks. The crawl space was tight, maybe 18 inches of clearance in some spots. The kind of job where you're on your belly with a headlamp, pulling old knob and tube wiring and trying not to think about what else is down there with you. On October 9th, I was under the east side of the house, near what used to be a bedroom, and my hand hit something that wasn't insulation. A plastic bag, ziplocked. Inside it, a composition notebook, black cover, water-stained but legible. I almost threw it out. I thought it was garbage, some kid's old school notebook. But I opened it anyway. The first page said, Colt Avery, personal investigation. Do not share. And below that, a name, underlined 3 times. Warren Fisk. Warren Fisk. If you lived in Tahlequah, you knew that name. You knew his face. You probably shook his hand at some point. He ran the Greenleaf Youth Initiative, a mentoring program for at-risk teenagers. He'd been doing it for 11 years. Coached kids through substance problems, family trouble, academic struggles, fundraisers, field trips, resume workshops. The guy was everywhere. City Council honored him in 2019. The Tahlequah Daily Press ran a profile calling him the quiet heart of Cherokee County. He had an office on South Water Avenue, small brick building, one of those converted storefronts with the metal awning. I'd done some wiring work there maybe 4 years earlier. Changed out a panel. He was polite. Had this way of talking where he'd put his hand on your shoulder and lean in, real close, like everything you said mattered deeply to him.
His office wall had a framed diploma, bachelor's degree in adolescent psychology from Hargrove University in Roanoke, Virginia. I remember he made a comment that day about not keeping digital records. Said he believed in face-to-face relationships, not paper trails. I thought it was old-fashioned. Now, I think it was survival. Colt's journal started in June 2022, 2 months before he died.
The first entry was short, just a couple lines. Colt wrote that he'd been searching for Hargrove University online and couldn't find it. No website, no alumni association, no listings in any accreditation database. He'd even called the Virginia Department of Education. They had no record of any institution by that name. I sat in my truck on Downing Lane and read that entry 3 times. The next entries got more detailed. Colt had started checking Warren's other credentials. The man claimed a certification in adolescent behavioral counseling from something called the Central Plains Institute. Colt couldn't find that either. He'd emailed the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health. No record of Warren Fisk holding any counseling certification in the state. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I wasn't reading these entries in order. The journal didn't work like that. Colt had dated some pages, left others blank. Sometimes circled back to an earlier entry with a new note crammed in the margin. I'd flip to something from August, then realize it referenced a page from June that I'd skimmed past. Twice, I thought I'd found a breakthrough detail, then realized I'd misread the date and it was something he'd already followed up on. Page after page, dates, search results, phone numbers he'd called, names of people he'd spoken to. This 17-year-old kid had done real investigative work, careful, methodical, and nobody knew. There was one entry, October 7th. Wait, no, it was July 7th. I remember because it was almost exactly 5 weeks before he died. He wrote, "I told Marcus about the diploma. He said I was overthinking it. Maybe I am. But if none of it's real, the degree, the certification, any of it, then what is he? Marcus." I didn't know who that was. Not yet. I closed the notebook, put it back in the bag, sat there for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel. The thing is, I wanted to put it back in the crawl space. I mean that. I wanted to stuff it back under the insulation and pretend I never saw it. Because Warren Fisk was, this was a man the town loved. Really loved. And I'm an electrician. I pull wire. I'm not a detective. I'm not a journalist. I'm a guy with a truck and a dog. But Colt was dead. And this notebook was the last thing he'd been working on. I brought it home. I spent 3 nights reading that journal cover to cover. 43 pages. Colt's handwriting got messier toward the end, more urgent. He'd started underlining things, circling them, drawing arrows between entries. Here's what he'd figured out. Warren Fisk had no verifiable academic history before arriving in Tahlequah in 2011. No degree, no certifications. The institutions he claimed on his office wall and on the program's website did not exist. Colt couldn't find a Warren Fisk in any university database, any alumni network, any professional registry. He'd tried Roanoke Public Records. He'd even searched yearbooks through some genealogy site. Nothing. The man was a ghost before 2011. And here's the part that made my stomach turn. On July 22nd, Colt wrote, "I told Mr. Fisk I'd been having trouble finding his school online. He said Hargrove closed in 2005 and the records got transferred. I asked where. He changed the subject. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, 'Some things are better left alone.'" I read that line and I couldn't sit still. I stood up and walked around my kitchen for 10 minutes. Now, I need to be honest. At this point, I still didn't know what any of it meant. A guy with fake credentials running a youth program? That's bad, sure. But it's not murder. There was no direct line from Warren's lies to Colt's death. Not yet. All I had was a journal and a sick feeling. The house on Downing Lane had been sitting empty for over a year before the Tulsa woman bought it. The realtor told me kids used to cut through the backyard on their way to the creek trail. It was a shortcut from the school side of town. Colt must have known the house was vacant, known the crawl space hatch in the utility closet was unlocked. That's where I found the bag, pushed up tight against the foundation wall, behind a run of old ductwork. He'd picked a spot nobody would check unless they were pulling wire.
The drifter theory was still the main thing people talked about when Colt came up. A guy people called Dusty had been camping near Briggs Ravine that summer. He'd been spotted in town a few times, had a record. The sheriff's office talked to him, apparently, but he'd moved on before anyone got serious about it. Some people figured he'd pushed Colt. Some figured Colt had gone out there to party and slipped. Either way, Dusty was the name people whispered. But the journal never mentioned Dusty, not once. Colt wasn't scared of some transient in the woods. He was scared of the man in the brick building on South Water Avenue. July 29th, 13 days before his death, Colt wrote,
I think he knows I've been asking questions. He called my dad, told him I seemed agitated and might need counseling. My dad believed him. Of course he did. Everybody believes Warren.
I called the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office the next morning, asked if anyone had recovered a notebook from Colt's belongings during the investigation. The deputy I spoke to said he'd check. He never called back. I called again 2 days later. Same answer. I drove to the records office on the third day. The clerk, young woman, maybe 25, looked at me like I'd asked to see classified documents. She said the case was closed, accidental death, no additional records available for public review. I drove home, sat in my driveway with the engine running and the notebook on the passenger seat, and I felt the full weight of it. I was the only person alive who knew what was in these pages. No one to call, no one who'd believe me. Just me and a dead kid's handwriting and the hum of a truck engine cooling down. If you know what that feels like, holding something dangerous with nobody to hand it to, tell me in the comments. Because that silence sat on my chest for weeks. And what I didn't know yet was that the sheriff's office wasn't the only door that was going to close on me. Not even close. Here's something about small towns that people who don't live in them don't understand. It's not that people are stupid. It's that the social structure has weight. You don't go after the guy who organizes the Christmas toy drive for Cherokee County kids. You don't question the man who got Darcy Holcomb's son through rehab or who helped Tina Birdsong's grandson with his college applications. Warren Fisk wasn't just a program director. He was proof that the system worked. He was the good thing in a town that didn't have enough good things. So when I started asking questions, quietly, carefully, about Warren's background, people looked at me like I was the problem. I mentioned it to my buddy at the supply house. He said, "Man, Warren's done more for this town than the rest of us combined. Let it go." Just like that, like I'd insulted his mother. I brought it up, carefully, with a woman at the tribal council office who I'd done work for. Different reaction. She went stiff, professional, said Warren had been vetted when the program started, said she was sure of it. Then she stood up from her desk and said she had a meeting. She didn't check. She didn't want to check. I even tried the school, called the front office at Tahlequah High and asked, hypothetically, if they had ever verified the credentials of outside mentors who worked with students. The receptionist said she'd transfer me to the principal. I sat on hold for 4 minutes. The line disconnected. There was one moment, I should mention this. I ran into a dad at the gas station whose daughter had been in Warren's program the year before. We got to talking. I steered it toward Warren, and at first he was open, said his daughter had a good experience. But then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "My wife did ask once about his training, where he went to school and all that. He gave her some answer about a college back east." I leaned in. I said, "Did she follow up?" He looked at me for a second, and I thought, here's someone who gets it. Someone who sees the gap. Then he shook his head and said, "She figured it checked out. I mean, the county runs the program, right? They wouldn't let just anyone in there." And he picked up his coffee and left. That crushed me. He'd been right there, right at the edge of the question, and he walked away from it. Not because he was dumb, because the assumption was so deep it didn't even register as an assumption. I should have gone to Colt's family then. I know that now. But I didn't know them well, and showing up at a grieving family's door with their dead son's notebook, I didn't have the guts. Not yet. It was mid-October by then. I was still working on the Downing Lane house. Every day I'd crawl under there, pull wire, come out covered in dust, and drive home to read the journal again, like I was trying to find something I'd missed. That's when I noticed the truck. A dark green Ford, maybe 2018 or 2019. parked on my street 3 nights in a row. Same spot, facing my house. I didn't get the plates the first 2 times. Third time, I walked out with my phone, and the truck pulled away before I got close enough. Could have been nothing. Could have been a neighbor's guest. I told myself that. But the journal was sitting on my kitchen table, and I couldn't stop thinking about Colt writing, "I think he knows."
The green Ford didn't come back after that third night, but the feeling it left behind did. I'd catch myself checking the street through the blinds before bed, parking my truck in the driveway instead of the curb so I could see it from the window. November came in and the Downing Lane job finished up. I moved on to a panel upgrade in Park Hill, about 15 minutes south. My days were normal. Work, hardware store, gas station, home. But the journal lived in my head. I'd started doing my own research. Nothing fancy. Just the same searches Colt had done. Hargrove University, Central Plains Institute, Warren Fisk's name in public records databases. I'm not great with computers, but I know how to search. And everything Colt found, I found too. Or didn't find. Hargrove University didn't exist. Never had. The closest thing was a Hargrove Academy in South Carolina, a prep school, not a college. The Central Plains Institute? Nothing. Not a website, not a filing, not a tax record. I even searched the Oklahoma Secretary of State's business database. 0 results. Warren Fisk before 2011 was a blank page. I tried to track down Dusty myself around this time. The drifter. Searched his name, his description, anything I could think of. Couldn't find a current address, a mugshot, nothing. He just disappeared into whatever comes after a small town doesn't need you as a suspect anymore. For a few days I wondered if maybe Dusty was the answer after all, if I was so focused on Warren that I was missing the obvious. A man with a record, camping near the ravine, gone before anyone looked hard enough. It fit, if you didn't think too much. But the journal kept pulling me back. Colt hadn't written 43 pages about a drifter. He'd written them about the man with the office on South Water Avenue. Now, here's where I almost let it go. I'm not kidding. It was the second week of November, and I was sitting in my truck outside the Park Hill job eating a gas station sandwich, and I thought, what if Colt was wrong? What if the school closed and the records really did get lost? What if Warren's a good man who got his degree from some tiny place that folded and nobody archived it? It happens. But then I thought about the crawl space. That notebook was wrapped in a plastic bag and shoved under insulation in a house Colt's family didn't own. He wasn't just keeping a journal. He was hiding evidence. A 17-year-old kid was hiding evidence from a man the town trusted. And 6 weeks later, he was dead at the bottom of a ravine. That's not a coincidence you walk away from. I started looking into Colt's death more carefully. The sheriff's report was public, the summary at least. Accidental fall, single male victim, head trauma consistent with a 40-foot drop. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no witnesses. But there was one thing that nagged at me. The report said Colt's phone was recovered at the scene, cracked but functional. His last text was to someone saved as MF at 6:47 p.m. on August 12th. The text read, "I'm going to talk to him tonight. I have everything I need." MF. I didn't know who that was. Not then. I assumed it was a friend, a girlfriend maybe. I tried to find out. Asked around at the high school, casually, through a friend whose daughter went there. Nobody knew a student with those initials. It took me until December to figure it out. But I need to tell you about what happened with Margot first. Warren's annual holiday gala was coming up, December 9th. The Greenleaf Youth Initiative's biggest event of the year. Half the town went. I didn't go to the gala, but I heard about it. Warren gave a speech, mentioned Colt by name, said the community had lost a bright light, and that Greenleaf would be dedicating a bench in Colt's memory at the county park. People cried. People clapped. The Tahlequah Daily Press ran a photo of Warren standing at the podium with his hand over his heart. I saw that photo on my phone the next morning, and I had to set it down on the counter. I couldn't look at it. This man, standing there, invoking the name of a boy who'd been investigating him, who'd written 43 pages about his lies, who was dead.
And nobody knew. Nobody except me. Margot found me on December 14th. I was at Brahms on Muskogee, grabbing a milkshake after a job. She came in, saw me, and walked over. I'd met her maybe twice before. She was 24, dark hair, serious eyes. She worked at the vet clinic around the corner. She sat down across from me and said, "I heard you've been asking about Warren Fisk." My stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" I asked. "Your buddy at the supply house. He thinks you're losing it." I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, "I'm not losing it." She stared at me. Then she said, "I know you're not, because Colt told me."
Now I want to pause here because this changes everything, and I want you to really sit with it. This whole time I thought I was alone, completely alone. And Margot walks into Brahms, and within 30 seconds the entire weight of this thing shifts. If you've ever had that moment where one conversation turns isolation into something you can actually carry, tell me about it in the comments, because I want to hear it. And what Margot told me next made me realize I hadn't even scratched the surface of what Warren Fisk was hiding. It came out in pieces. Margot had known about Colt's investigation. Not everything, he'd kept most of it to himself, but enough. He told her in July that Warren's credentials were fake. She said he was excited about it, like he'd cracked some puzzle. She tried to talk him out of pursuing it, told him to tell their parents. He said he wanted more proof first. After Colt died, Margot spent weeks trying to find his notebook. She'd searched his room, his locker, his car. She knew he'd been writing everything down. She couldn't find it. "I think he hid it somewhere," she said. "I just don't know where." I looked at her across that table at Brahms, and I knew what I had to do. "I found it," I said. Her hands started shaking. She pressed them flat on the table, and she just looked at me, didn't speak, didn't move, for maybe 10 seconds. Then she said, "Where?" "In a crawlspace. A house on Downing Lane. He must have hidden it there before..." She cut me off. "Before someone could take it from him." We sat there for a long time. The milkshake melted. I didn't touch it. I told her everything. The fake diploma, the non-existent schools, the searches I'd done, the truck on my street, the sheriff's office brushing me off. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "He called me that night, August 12th, around 7. He said he was going to confront Warren. I told him not to. I begged him not to." Her voice cracked. "He said it would be fine. He said Warren was just a liar, not dangerous." MF, Margot's initials were MA, Margot Avery, but the text had gone to MF. I asked her about it. She went pale. "That wasn't me," she said. "MF, that's Marcus Fisk." Marcus Fisk, Warren's son. Warren wasn't just a fraud. He'd built a family here, a life. His son Marcus was 20, worked at the auto parts store on Highway 62. And Colt, this kid, had been close with Marcus. They'd grown up together through the program. December turned into January. Margot and I started meeting every few days, usually at the Brahms, sometimes at the park near Norris Creek. We'd go over the journal. She'd fill in context I didn't have. Margot wasn't an investigator. She wasn't a lawyer or a journalist. She was a 24-year-old vet tech whose little brother was dead. But she was sharp, and she was angry in a way that was quiet and steady and didn't go away. She told me things about Warren I hadn't known. Small things. How he'd sometimes keep kids after program hours without telling parents. How he'd insist on being the only adult in the room during mentoring sessions. How he'd once told a parent who questioned his methods that she was undermining her son's progress. The parent backed off. I should have written this stuff down as she told me, made a list, dated it. I didn't. I just sat there and listened and let it pile up in my head like everything else. Margot was better about that. She kept notes on her phone organized by date. I kept mine in a fog. None of it was illegal on its face. None of it was proof, but the pattern was there. A man with no credentials, no verifiable past, working alone with teenagers behind closed doors, protected by reputation, protected by gratitude. I asked Margot if she thought Warren had hurt Colt, physically. She was quiet for a while, then she said, "I don't know, but I know my brother was afraid of him at the end, and Colt wasn't afraid of anything." That sentence broke something open. I tried Marcus. That was a mistake.
I went to the auto parts store on a Thursday afternoon. He was behind the counter. Young guy, thin, nervous energy. When I walked in, I thought maybe MF stood for a girlfriend, a Marcus and Fiona, a Marcus and Faith, something innocent. I told him I was a friend of Colt's family and asked if he remembered the text from August 12th. He went white. Literally, the color left his face. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Colt texted you that night. You're MF in his phone." He said, "Get out of my store." Then louder, "Get out!" I left. My hands were shaking in the parking lot. Not from fear, from frustration. 2 days later, Warren Fisk showed up at my house.
Saturday morning, January 14th, 2023. I was in my driveway loading tools into the truck. A silver sedan pulled up and Warren got out. Casual, smiling, like he was just passing by. "Reed, right?" he said. "I've a meaning to come say hello. I heard you were asking some questions about the program." I didn't respond right away. He stepped closer. He had this way of standing, just slightly too close, just slightly leaning forward, like he was your best friend and you just didn't know it yet. "I appreciate the community interest," he said. "Really. But some of these questions, about my background, my credentials, they're putting ideas in people's heads, and ideas can be harmful," I said. I wasn't asking about the program. He tilted his head. The smile stayed. "Then what were you asking about?" "Colt Avery." The smile didn't move, but his eyes did. Just for a second, just a flash of something behind them. Then it was gone. "Colt was a tragedy," he said. "We all carry that. I carry it every day." He put his hand on my arm. "But digging around in a young man's death, that doesn't help anyone heal, Reed. It just opens wounds." He squeezed my arm once and walked back to his car, got in, drove away. "That doesn't help anyone heal." I stood there and replayed that sentence in my head. The way he said it, warm, concerned, like a counselor talking to a patient. Except he wasn't a counselor. He'd never been a counselor. He was a man wearing a costume made of diplomas that didn't exist. Subscribe right now, because With Margot Found Next made everything I just told you look like a paperwork error. January and February were slow. I worked, I came home, I read the journal. Margot and I kept talking. She'd started her own research, digging into Warren's history before Tahlequah, using her lunch breaks at the vet clinic to search databases, call state offices, email anyone who might have records. She was meticulous, patient. She'd inherited that from Colt, or maybe Colt had gotten it from her. What she found in February changed everything. Warren Fisk wasn't Warren Fisk. I mean, he was legally. He'd had the name since 2010, changed it in Denton County, Texas. A standard legal name change. The original name was Warren Lindvall, and Warren Lindvall had a record. Not in Oklahoma, in Oregon. 2006. 2 counts of unlawful sexual contact with a minor. He'd been running a similar youth program in Medford. Plea deal, 3 years probation, mandatory treatment, sex offender registration. He completed the probation. Then, he moved to Texas, changed his name, and vanished from the registry. He showed up in Tahlequah in 2011 as Warren Fisk. Clean name, clean background check. Because the check was run on a name that was 14 months old. Fake diploma on the wall, a smile that made you trust him. And for 11 years, he'd been mentoring teenagers. Margot called me on a Tuesday night. Her voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it. She read me the Oregon court filing. She'd found it through a public records aggregator, the kind that catches old aliases if you search wide enough. 2 counts, she said. Both victims were 15. I sat on my kitchen floor with my phone pressed to my ear, and I didn't say anything for a long time. Biscuit came over and put his head on my knee. Colt hadn't found this. His journal didn't mention Oregon or the name change. He'd been close. He knew the credentials were fake, but he hadn't gotten to the full truth. He ran out of time. I think about that sometimes. What would have happened if Colt had one more week, one more search term? If he'd typed Warren Fisk into the right database on the right night? Would he still be alive? Would he have told someone who could have stopped it? I don't know. I'll never know. And that's the kind of thought that doesn't let you sleep. Now here's what I need you to think about. Really think about it. You've been listening to this story. You know what the sheriff's office did when I called. You know what the county did with those complaints. If you'd found what we found, would you go back to the same people? The same system that let this happen? Or would you try another way? Tell me in the comments, because I went back and forth on this for 3 days, and what we decided is coming up. Margot wanted to go to the state, skip local law enforcement entirely. She'd already lost trust in Cherokee County after the way they'd handled Colt's death. I agreed. But we needed more than a name change and an Oregon conviction. We needed someone to take this seriously. I couldn't eat for 3 days after that phone call. Not exaggerating, just couldn't do it. Everything tasted wrong. I lost 9 pounds in February. We found a journalist, a woman named Delia Parkhurst, who worked for an investigative outlet out of Tulsa. She'd covered institutional failures before: schools, foster care, tribal programs. Margot emailed her on February 22nd. She responded within an hour. Delia was careful, professional. She didn't promise anything, but she asked for the journal, the Oregon records, and the name change filing. We gave her copies of everything, and then we waited. March was the hardest month. Delia was doing her work, verifying records, contacting Oregon authorities, running background on Warren/Lindvall. She told us not to contact Warren, not to talk to Marcus, not to do anything that could tip him off. So we sat. And while we sat, Warren kept going. The Greenleaf program ran its spring session. 19 teenagers enrolled. Delia had mentioned that spring enrollment closed April 1st, meaning another round of kids was about to start one-on-one sessions with this man. That deadline sat in my chest like a stone. I drove past the brick building on South Water Avenue one afternoon and saw 3 kids walking in through the front door, backpacks on, laughing. I pulled over and just watched them go inside. And I thought, is he doing it now? Is it happening right now while I'm sitting in this truck watching? The weight of it. I don't know how to explain this right. My hands weren't steady anymore. I'd noticed them trembling when I was holding a wire nut or signing an invoice. February's lost weight hadn't come back. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and just lie there, staring at the ceiling, running through every piece of evidence like a checklist I couldn't finish. Margot handled it differently. She was focused, clinical almost. She channeled everything into organizing our evidence, timelines, annotated copies of the journal, a spreadsheet cross-referencing Warren's claimed history with what actually existed. But one night, late March, she called me and she was crying. Not the steady, controlled Margot I'd been working with, just crying. She said, "He would have been 18 next week. He would have graduated this year." I said, "I know." She said, "And that man is still in there with kids." I started to say something. I think I was going to say, "We're close," or "Delia's almost done." And then I just stopped, because that wasn't what she needed. There was nothing to say that would be enough. We just sat on the phone and didn't talk for a while. Sometimes that's all you can do. Here's what I've learned from all of this. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that's true about every story like this one. Silence isn't empty. It's full. It's full of every excuse, every blind eye, every "I'm sure it's fine" that people say to avoid doing something hard. The false lead died quietly around this time. Delia tracked down Dusty, the drifter people had suspected. He was in Joplin, Missouri, had been since September 2022. He had receipts, a lease, a parole officer who confirmed his location. He'd left Tahlequah 2 weeks before Colt died. He wasn't at Briggs Ravine that night. He wasn't anywhere near it, which meant the only person with a motive, the only person Colt had told about his investigation, the only person who stood to lose everything if the truth came out, was Warren. One thing I should mention. Around mid-March, I noticed something at my house. My back gate was open one morning. I always lock it. Biscuit sleeps in the yard some nights, and I don't take chances. I checked the latch. It wasn't broken. Somebody had opened it. The grass on the side of the house, I noticed this later when the sun hit it right, was pressed down in a line from the gate to the back window. like someone had walked through. I don't know who, I don't know why. But after that, I started sleeping with the journal in my truck instead of the kitchen. March ended the way it started. Slow, heavy. The last 2 nights I sat on my porch with Biscuit and watched the street go dark. My neighbor's porch light buzzed. A dog barked 3 blocks over. I told myself, it's almost over. Hold on. April 4th, 2023. Delia called. The Oregon Department of Justice had confirmed Warren Lindvall's conviction. The Denton County name change was verified. The sex offender registry in Oregon showed him non-compliant, failed to update his registration after leaving the state. 2 active warrants out of Jackson County, Oregon. Failure to register. Hargrove University had never existed. Not as a college, not as a trade school, not as anything. The Central Plains Institute? Same. Fabricated. She told me the Oregon confirmation first. I was standing in my kitchen holding a glass of water. I set it down on the counter because my hand wasn't steady. Then the warrants. Then the institutions. Each piece landed separately, and I had to sit with it before she moved on. At one point, she paused and asked if I was still there. I was. I just couldn't talk. But here's what Delia found that Margot and I hadn't. 3 other parents in Tahlequah had filed complaints about Warren with the county between 2015 and 2020. Minor stuff. Boundary concerns, uncomfortable with one-on-one meetings, asked about qualifications, didn't get a satisfactory answer. All 3 complaints had gone to the Cherokee County Commissioner's office. All 3 had been noted and filed. None had been investigated. 3 parents in 5 years. And nobody connected the dots. Nobody pulled the thread. This is the part I have to be careful with, because it's the part that still makes me angry. Warren Lindvall, was a convicted sex offender operating under a false name with fabricated credentials, running an unsupervised youth program in a community that trusted him completely. And the systems that were supposed to catch him, the background checks, the county oversight, the credential verification, they all failed. Every single one. Colt caught it. A 17-year-old with a composition notebook and an internet connection caught what the county, the school system, and the state all missed. And then he was dead at the bottom of a ravine. And here's the part that made my hands shake when Delia told me. Warren's fundraising gala that December, the one where he stood at the podium and invoked Colt's name, some of the families who donated that night were the same families I'd done electrical work for. I'd been in their homes, replaced the panels, played with their kids' dogs, and their money went to fund a program run by a convicted sex offender who'd changed his name and printed a fake diploma. The community I'd served, it was the same community he'd exploited. Delia's story was ready for publication on April 10th, but she wanted one more thing. She wanted a statement from Warren. Journalistic practice. Give the subject a chance to respond. She sent him a detailed email on April 7th, laid out everything. The name change, Oregon, the fake credentials, the complaints, Colt's journal, asked for comment. He didn't respond. On April 9th, one day before publication, Warren held an emergency board meeting for the Greenleaf Youth Initiative. 5 board members, all community volunteers. He told him a journalist was about to publish baseless allegations designed to destroy the program. He asked for a vote of confidence. He got it, 4-1. The lone dissent was Patricia Yarbrough. She was the only board member who asked to see the evidence before voting. Delia published the story on April 10th, 2023. Front page of the Tulsa Outlet. Statewide pickup by noon. National Wire by evening. Within 3 hours, Warren Fisk's office on Southwater Avenue was dark. The door was locked. His car was gone from the parking lot. But he didn't run. I'll give him that. He didn't run. The town split. Some people read the article and went quiet. The kind of quiet that means they're rearranging everything they thought they knew. Others, and I heard this directly, said it was overblown. Warren made mistakes with his paperwork, but he's done too much good. One man at the gas station told me, to my face, that I should be ashamed of myself. I wasn't ashamed. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation opened a case on April 14th. They didn't mess around. 2 agents showed up in Tahlequah the next day.
The lead agent came to my house and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. I gave her the original journal, every page. She handled it with gloves. She told me, very calmly, that they were treating Colt's death as a potential homicide. I asked her what that meant exactly. She said it meant the OSBI would be reviewing the original investigation, the physical evidence, and conducting new interviews. She said it could take months. It took 5. But before the OSBI finished their work, before any charges were filed, something happened that I didn't plan for. April 22nd, a Saturday. Community potluck at the Greenleaf Building, or what had been the Greenleaf Building. Someone had organized it as a show of support for Warren. Standing with Warren, they called it. Handmade signs, covered dishes. About 40 people showed up. I didn't go. Margot didn't go. We were both staying away on Delia's advice and the OSBI's instruction. Marcus Fisk went, and Marcus broke. I wasn't there. I'm telling you what I heard from 3 different people who were, including Patricia Yarbrough. But I believe every word.
Warren was standing at the front of the room, speaking, thanking people for their support, saying the accusations were a misunderstanding, saying he'd never hurt anyone, saying Colt was like a son to him. Marcus was sitting in the back row. He'd been quiet the whole time. Patricia said he was gripping the edges of his chair with both hands. She said his jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck were visible from 3 rows back. When Warren said Colt's name, Marcus stood up. "Stop," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Warren looked at him. "Son, don't call me that." Patricia said the room went dead silent. 40 people. Not a fork moved. Not a chair creaked. Somebody's toddler started to fuss, and the mother pressed the child against her shoulder without looking away from the front. Marcus walked to the front. His hands were shaking. His face was wet. And he said, and I'm telling you this from 3 consistent accounts, he said, "Colt texted me that night, August 12th, at 6:47 p.m. He said he was going to talk to you. He said he had everything he needed to prove you were a fraud." Warren put his hand up. "Marcus, this isn't the place. I called you right after I got that text. I called you and I told you what Colt was going to do, and you said—" Marcus stopped. His breathing was ragged. Patricia said she could see his chest heaving from across the room. His hands were at his sides, opening and closing. "You said, 'I'll handle it.' Those were your exact words. 'I'll handle it.' And the next morning, Colt was dead." Nobody spoke. "I've been carrying this for 8 months." Marcus's voice cracked. 8 months. And every single morning I wake up and I think about that text message. And I think about what I did, and I can't do this anymore. I can't keep his name in my mouth like some kind of, like I loved him. When I'm the reason—" He didn't finish. He put his hands over his face and he fell apart. Right there, in front of 40 people. Patricia said a sound came out of him that she'd never heard a person make. Not a scream, not a sob. Something lower. Something that had been held in too long. Warren stood there. His face, and this is from Patricia, his face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Shock, then fury, then something Patricia called complete emptiness, like a screen going dark. He didn't deny it. That's what kills me. He didn't say, "That's not true," or "You're confused," or "I didn't do anything." He just stood there, and then he walked out. I heard about the potluck that night. Margot called me. She'd gotten 3 calls in 20 minutes from people who'd been there. She told me what Marcus had said. I listened. Then I told her I'd call her back. I sat in my truck in the driveway, engine off, windows down. Biscuit was asleep in the passenger seat. The street light on Choctaw was doing that thing where it flickers before it fully comes on. I sat there and I felt my hands on the steering wheel, and I tried to understand what had just happened. A 20-year-old kid had just torn his own life apart in front of 40 people to tell the truth about his father. And I was sitting in a truck in the dark, and I didn't know if what I felt was relief or grief or just exhaustion. My jaw hurt. I realized I'd been clenching it for hours. The OSBI arrested Warren Fisk, Warren Lindvall, on September 8, 2023. 1 count of murder in the first degree,
1 count of identity fraud, 3 counts of failure to register as a sex offender. The physical evidence from Briggs Ravine was re-examined. They found DNA under Colt's fingernails that matched Warren. They found fiber evidence on Colt's jacket consistent with the interior of Warren's sedan. The forensic pathologist who reviewed the case concluded that the injuries were inconsistent with an accidental fall and consistent with a physical altercation followed by a push. He fought. A 17-year-old kid. He fought.
The trial was in January 2024, Cherokee County District Court. Took 8 days. Marcus testified. Margot testified. I testified. Delia's investigation was entered as evidence. The journal, all 43 pages, was read into the record. Warren's defense attorney argued that Marcus's testimony was unreliable, that the DNA evidence was inconclusive, and that the identity fraud was a separate matter from Colt's death. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. All counts. Warren Linval was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was 61 years old. I sat in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Margot was next to me. She didn't cry. She didn't react at all. She just sat very still with her hands folded in her lap. After a minute, she leaned over and whispered, "He graduated." I didn't understand at first. Then I did. Colt, class of 2023. He would have graduated. The Cherokee County Commissioner's Office launched an internal review of how Warren's program had operated without oversight for 11 years. 3 officials resigned. The county adopted new verification protocols for youth-serving organizations. The 3 families who had filed complaints received formal apologies from the county. Marcus Fisk cooperated fully with the investigation. He was not charged. The district attorney determined he had no advance knowledge of violence and that his testimony was essential to the case. He left Tahlequah in the spring of 2024. I heard he went to community college somewhere in Arkansas. I think about Marcus sometimes. That moment in the potluck, the way he stood up, the way his voice broke. That kid had been carrying a weight no 20-year-old should carry. He'd been carrying the worst phone call of his life for 8 months. And when he broke in front of the whole town. I'm not going to pretend I forgive him for the delay. 8 months. Colt was in the ground for 8 months while Marcus sat on that information. But I'm also not going to pretend I know what it's like to find out your father is a predator and possibly a murderer, and that the last thing you did was hand him the weapon he needed. That's between Marcus and whatever he sees when he closes his eyes. And this is where I want to talk to you for a second. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to all of this, then you know what kind of story this is. It's not a story about one bad man. It's a story about a system that let a bad man operate for 11 years because nobody asked the obvious question. Is this person who they say they are? Colt asked that question, and it cost him his life. So if you're still here, if this landed the way I think it did, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. Not for me, for the next story, because there are more of them in towns just like this one, and the people in those stories need someone to listen. Hit the like button so this reaches somebody who needs it tonight. And in the comments, tell me, has there ever been someone in your life, in your community, that everybody trusted, but nobody actually verified? Someone where the credentials were just assumed? I think more people will recognize that than we'd like to admit. Share this with somebody who gets it. And if you want more stories from towns where the silence ran deep, there's another one waiting for you right here on this channel. I'm back in Tahlequah, still pulling wire, still driving the same truck. Biscuit's getting old. He's 11 now, mostly sleeps in the cab while I work. Margot and I are friends, real friends, not just investigation partners. We get coffee on Saturdays sometimes. We don't always talk about Colt. Sometimes we do. The bench the town dedicated in Colt's memory at the county park, the one Warren announced at his gala. It got installed in June 2024. Small brass plaque, Colt Avery, 2005 to 2022. He asked the questions nobody else would. Margot picked the words. I drove past it last Thursday on my way to a job. It was early, 6:30 in the morning. The sun was just coming up over the hills east of town. Nobody was there. The bench was empty.
The brass caught the light. I kept driving.